thanks everyone for attending this session. I'll be talking on Pollock's desacralization of the Indian Rasa tradition. So just about briefly about myself, I think Shalini has already mentioned the important details. So I recently wrote this book called Natural Enmity based on my honors thesis, which I did in 2013 from the University of Sydney. And if you want to stay in touch with me, I'm active on Twitter as well as I also run my blog at satyandrutam.wordpress.com where I have my other articles as well. So today's session, this paper on desacralization of Rasa is basically written on these four papers that Pollock has written, basically on the Sanskrit, the social aesthetic and the Sanskrit literary theory. And what I found in these papers was that there was a very systematic attempt being made to sort of desacralize Rasa, that is, remove the religious aspect of Indian aesthetic theory and transform it into a socio-political aesthetic. And I think I have more on that in the next slide, which is, so basically these are the two strategies for desacralizing Kavya. And desacralizing Kavya, as I said, means that we stop thinking of it as a religious aesthetic and try and think of it as a socio-political aesthetic. And the two strategies that Pollock has employed, one is politicizing Kavya, which means to distinguish Kavya as a separate genre from the Vedas, in the sense that the Vedas belong to the sacred realm and Kavya belongs to the worldly or the political realm. To show that the Kavya actually begins with the Ramayana and not from the Vedas, and to reduce Kavya to Prashasti, which is the eulogistic inscriptions that kings used to build for, to sort of let people know of their achievements and so on. So that's one way of that Pollock employs. The other one is to distort the Kavya Shastra tradition itself, which is he takes those people who have whose works can be used to show Kavya as a political aesthetic, such as Bhoja and Bhattanayaka, and he valorizes them. He says that these are the most important Kavya Shastra scholars, and the tradition has neglected them. And on the other hand, he takes the scholars who are treated as geniuses within the tradition, like Anandavardhan and Abhinav Gupta, and he tries to diminish their importance because it is their work which kind of lends itself to understanding Kavya as a religious aesthetic. So in this presentation and in my essay, I have basically explored these two strategies to discuss them in detail. So first we will look at the politicization of Kavya. So the question arises as to, is there Kavya in the Vedas? Now, you could say, now it all depends upon how you define Kavya. So for example, I mean, generally when you say Kavya, we mean like any literature which is beautiful. And beautiful could be because it has alankars, it has metaphors, figures, tropes, and so on. So in the Vedas, for example, you have the very famous mantras, like verses like the Dva Suparna Sayuja Sakhaya, which basically means that refers to these two birds sitting in the tree, and one of them is the Karta Bhokta Atman, the other one is the Sakshi Bhuta Atman, and so you can say that, look, using the metaphor of birds and the tree as the body and so on, the Veda is conveying its message in a beautiful way, and so there is Kavya in the Vedas. But what Pollock will say is that no, that is a Paramarthik Sat. Paramarthik Sat in the sense that it is, based on your logical reasoning, you have defined Kavya in a certain way, and having analyzed the data and so on, whatever truths you arrive at through that is what he calls as the Paramarthik Sat. And he says, on the other hand, there is the Vyavaharik Sat, which is basically how the tradition understands it. So it may not make logical sense to us, but certain things are understood in a way by the tradition, and that is important because historically people have acted on their perceptions, not necessarily on what is logically correct. So you may say that it is logically correct to say that Kavya begins with the Vedas, and you can argue your point, but the important thing is, what does the tradition say? Does your tradition say this? And he says, no, the tradition says that the Adikavya is the Ramayana and Valmiki is the Adikavi. And the tradition also distinguishes between the Vedas and the Kavya, where it regards the Veda as the Prabhu Samhita Shabda and Kavya as the Kanta Samhita Shabda. And Prabhu Samhita Shabda means that it is the word of the Lord or the king or something like that. And Kanta Samhita Shabda means the word of the beloved or the wife or something of that sort. So, because of these distinctions, Pollock says that, look, the tradition, the tradition does not see Kavya as beginning with the Vedas, and so the Vedas belong to the sacred realm, and the Kavya belongs to the secular realm or the political realm. But the way we can sort of refute this kind of an argument is by showing, first of all, that even if the tradition has distinguished between Prabhu Samhita Shabda and Kanta Samhita Shabda, it does not mean that the content of the Vedas or what the Vedas are trying to communicate is different from what Kavya is trying to communicate. It does not mean that the scope or their subjects of knowledge are different. What it means is just this, that the Vedas expresses itself differently from Kavya. So if, for example, the Vedas wanted to say that, you should not go west, for example, the Vedas will simply say, do not go west. I mean, that is a command. It will just issue you a command. And that is what this Prabhu Samhita Shabda is. Whereas if it was a Kavi who was saying that to you, if a Kavi wanted to tell you don't go west, he would say something like, oh, you know what, you should go west because, there is this magnificent dragon out there, you should go and see it. I mean, basically, he's telling you to go there, but he's saying it to you in such a way that you will not want to go there. And so that's how Kavya communicates this message. And so the distinction between Vedas and Kavyas is not in terms of their content, but in terms of their manner of expression. And similarly, when the tradition recognizes Ramayana as the Adi Kavya, what it means is that, as you know, Valmiki experienced this shoka, this grief, when he saw this bird getting killed by the hunter. And it was this shoka from which the shloka emerged, and that is where the Ramayana has come from. And so basically, when the tradition recognizes Ramayana as the Adi Kavya, what it is saying is that, look, this is a work that has arisen from, or it's an expression of human emotion, of human suffering. And that is why this is a Kavya, and we do not recognize the Veda as something of that sort. So it is in this sense that we are saying that the Ramayana is a Adi Kavya. So these are things that Pollock does not take into consideration. And of course, there is nowhere where the tradition itself makes a distinction that, this is sacred and this is political. I mean, this is Pollock's own innovation. Similarly, his reduction of Kavya to Prashasti. So when he's discussing Kavya, he's mainly looking at all these eulogistic inscriptions that kings have inscribed. But then if you look at the Kavya Shastra tradition, there is very little reflection as such on Prashasti. I mean, there's a lot of reflection on Alankars, Guna, Dosha, and all the rest of, all those sort of things. What is Rasa? Where does Rasa come from? And all that stuff. So that is what the tradition is interested in. It's not interested in how can this literature enable kings to sort of express their political will. So these are sort of Pollock's own ideas, his own innovations. And that's fine. I mean, if you want to have these sort of ideas, that's one issue. But to say that the tradition is saying these things, I mean, that's what he's trying to do, because he wants to avoid the charge of Orientalism. And so it's out of that, for that reason, that he feels compelled not only to assert his own ideas, but to show that these are endorsed by the tradition itself. The other strategy, as I said, was to elevate certain scholars like Bhoja and Bhattanayaka, whose works are amenable to understanding Kavya as a socio-political aesthetic, and to diminish the importance of others like Abhinav Gupta, whose writings sort of lend to understanding rasa or kavya as a religious aesthetic. So now, uh, as I said, I mean, the main thrust of the Kavya Shastra tradition is to understand how does Kavya produce its beauty and delight. I mean, how it is, because Kavya is something that produces Saundarya, that is characterized by Saundarya. It produces a Ramaniyata and Allahada among the reader, in the reader, and it produces Rasa, or the aesthetic emotion. And the question is, how does Kavya do it? Okay, so that is really what the Kavya Shastra tradition has sought to understand. And with regards to rasa, there are these two theories that we find in the tradition. That is, rasa arises from the text or the drama, that is from the character, like say Ram or Sita, the performance or the character of what these people have done historically. That is what is creating the rasa. And the other theory is that of readerly rasa, which is to say that rasa arises in the reader. Not, it does not arise from the text, but from the reader's grasp of the text. And so there are these two theories of textual rasa and readerly rasa. And of these two things, we see that textual rasa kind of lends itself to a political aesthetic, because then you're saying that a text is written in a certain way so that it produces a rasa, and through its rasa, it kind of influences people to act in certain ways. And so the textual rasa can, sorry, can lend itself to a political aesthetic, while the readerly rasa, which lays emphasis on the reader and how the reader understands the text, lends itself to a religious aesthetic. And so, as I said, Pollock's main aim in studying the Kavya Shastra tradition is to valorize those scholars who emphasize the textual rasa, like Bhoja and Bhattanayaka, and to diminish the importance of scholars like Abhinav Gupta, who focused on readerly rasa. Anandavardhan was also textual rasa, but that's a complication to which I'll come subsequently. So we'll see how he devalorizes Anandavardhan and Abhinav Gupta first. So Anandavardhan is famous for his Dhwani theory, which says that Dhwani is the Atman of Kavya, or that it is because it is through Dhwani that Rasa is produced. It is Dhwani that creates beauty in Kavya. And what Dhwani means is that the expressed meaning is contrary to the intended meaning. So this is one example of Kavya there before you. You're free to go wandering, O holy man. The little dog was killed today by the fierce lion making its lair in the thicket on the banks of the Goda river. So in this verse, for example, there is a vidhi which says, you're free to go wherever you want. But there is, at the same time, in the vidhi, there is concealed a nishedha, or a prohibition, arising from the fact that you should not be going to that thicket on the bank of the Goda river because there is a lion out there. But you haven't been told in so many words, don't go there. It is just that in fact, what you have been told is, you can go anywhere you want. So, but at the same time, because of this concealment of this prohibition, that is why Anandavardhan says this is kavya. This is what creates beauty in kavya. That is your expressed meaning is you're free to go anywhere, but your intended meaning is don't go to that thicket. Okay, and this is the linguistic suggestion which Anandavardhan has called as dhwani, and what he says is the basis of beauty. Okay. But now Abhinav Gupta, whose Lochana is a commentary on the Dhvanya Loka of Anandavardhan, where he has laid out his Dhvani theory, it sort of, when it is interpreting this particular verse, he says that this verse was actually uttered by a woman who was trying to conceal her meeting place where she was supposed to meet her lover. So obviously she does not want people to go there, and that is why she's saying this. Now, there is nothing, this is what Abhinav Gupta said, and this is how the Kavya Shastra tradition has basically understood this verse. But what Pollock is saying that, look, there is nothing in this verse that says that this was uttered by a woman for this particular reason. And he kind of picks up on that. So how did Abhinav Gupta understand this? Why has the tradition understood this verse in this manner? And in fact, for him, that is the suggestion that what the verse is trying to get at is the loose and devious character of women. That women say these kind of things because women are these adulteresses and they have all these affairs and they want to conceal the hiding places from everyone else. And so, what this verse is trying to tell us is basically a sort of a comment on women or a comment on the character of women. And it is not so much a linguistic suggestion, but it is a social suggestion. It's a socio-political suggestion. It's a way of gender oppression or something by dehumanizing women or something like that. So for him, suggestion is basically social, not linguistic, and that people like Abhinav Gupta and Anandavardhan and the rest of them, they have sort of not realized the sociality of the text, but instead focused mainly on the linguistic aspect of it. And so, in this way, he's trying to sort of say that look, the tradition has flaws in it, because the whole point of literature is to communicate a socio-political message. This verse is also doing that, but this is not what the tradition studied. The tradition is kind of obsessed with the linguistics, and a result of which it becomes blind to its sociality. So this is how he sort of tries to diminish the importance of these scholars, that they did not study their subject properly. On the other hand, there is Bhoja, and Bhoja, who has written the Saraswati Kantavaranam and the Shringara Prakash mainly. And what Pollock is very impressed with Bhoja, because Bhoja, he makes all the right noises on this, because he says, well, Kavya is for the maintenance of socio-political order. The whole point of Kavya is a command, which is to sort of um, uh, so sort of send a signal to the audience on how they're supposed to behave in the world. The hero is a socio-moral agent. His behavior kind of encodes the socio-moral norms and so on. And this is really what Pollock wants, and he sees this in Bhoja's theory, and he therefore projects Bhoja as the champion of the original tradition. That is, this is what the Kavya Shastra tradition was originally about. It was originally about a socio-political aesthetic. But then there occurred this Kashmiri revolution, as he calls it, which is sort of like an aberration. It happened, he says, because of the decline of the civic courtly ethos in Kashmir. And by Kashmiri, because Abhinav Gupta and Anandavardhan are both from Kashmir. So that's what that Kashmiri revolution refers to. And it happened, as I said, according to Pollock, because there was a decline. And he has discussed that in detail in his Death of Sanskrit. And I think in the last conference, Manodnya Shastri and others who wrote on the Death of Sanskrit have already pointed out the issues with that sort of thesis. But anyway, but that is basically Pollock's. That's the way Pollock tries to sort of establish that the whole point of Kavya Shastra was to study Kavya as a socio-political aesthetic. Now, what is ironical actually in all this is Neil Delmonico, who is another American scholar of Kavya Shastra. He has in fact written a thesis saying that Rupa Goswami, his religious aesthetic. I mean, Rupa Goswami, as you know, is a great Gaudiya Vaishnava scholar, and he's written a lot of work on Rasa. And his religious aesthetic is actually based on Bhojas, not on Abhinav Gupta. I mean, usually one thinks of Abhinav Gupta as the basis of religious aesthetic in India, but even in Bhoja there is a religious aesthetic, and this is what has led to Rupa Goswami's works. Now, Pollock knows this because partly Delmonico supports his thesis that Bhoja has been neglected in the Kavya Shastra tradition. And Bhoja has been neglected in the Kavya Shastra tradition, so he's happy that Delmonico has pointed that out. But at the same time, he says that in the rest of his thesis, I cannot follow him, which is to say that, in as much as Delmonico says that Bhoja also subscribed to a religious aesthetic and that was influential, he does not want to sort of deal with that. So you can see how, he just as we saw in the previous case, that he just takes whatever is convenient to his narrative and ignores whatever he thinks would go against it. Bhattanayak's case is a bit complicated. I don't know how much I will be able to explain it through this presentation, but I'll try. Bhattanayaka is actually the scholar in Kavya Shastra tradition who first established the idea that rasa arises in the reader and not in the text. Now, as I said, readerly rasa is something that Pollock does not like. So Bhattanayaka should actually be his enemy. But the thing is, Bhattanayak was an opponent of Anandavardhan's Dhwani theory. And Bhattanayak's point was that, Anandavardhan's point was that rasa arises from the text. It arises on account of the Vyanjana Shakti, which is the suggestive power, as I said, or the Dhwani, and it arises as a vyakti or a manifestation. So there is no production of rasa, but rasa is already there. It just manifests itself in the text. And well, this doesn't really make any sense because how does the text manifest rasa? And what Bhattanayak is saying is because Bhattanayak is a Mimausak, and as a Mimausak, he does not believe in any of this Vyanjana Shakti stuff. For him, there is only one Shakti in language, which is the Abhidha Shakti, or the direct expressive power or the denotative power of language. And it is on account of this Abhidha Shakti of the language that rasa is produced. There is a production, there is a bhavana of rasa in the reader. And he is kind of modeling all this based on the Mimamsa theory of language in the Vedas. That is, the Vedas, by their language, just as the Vedas, by the sheer power of the language, inspires the reader to act, to perform certain actions. In the same way, he says that the Abhidha Shakti of the text produces rasa in the reader, and there is no such thing as Vyanjana Shakti. Now, so basically what he's saying is that, okay, rasa does arise in the reader, but it arises because of the Abhidha Shakti or the power of the language, or the power of the text. And that is why Pollock is partial towards Bhattanayaka, because even if the rasa is arising in the reader, its central locus is still in the text, and that is what Pollock wants. But then along came Abhinav Gupta, and he ruined this whole thing. What Abhinav Gupta said is that yes, fine, rasa does arise in the reader, it does not arise in the text, but it is a vyakti, it is a manifestation in the reader. Rasa is not produced by the text in the reader. Rasa gets manifested in the reader on account of the interaction between his own vasanas, that is his sarudayata, his rasikata, whatever, and its engagement with the Vyanjana Shakti of the text. So the text has a Vyanjana Shakti. The reader grasps that Vyanjana Shakti on account of his rasikata, on account of his vasana, and that is what creates within him that delight. And that delight is what is a sort of a semblance or is akin to the Brahmaswada. It's almost like a religious experience. So, and that's what I mean if you look at the fourth point when I say, Bhattanayak's point was that rasa is produced as a shabdavrutti, a linguistic modality, but what Abhinav Gupta is saying is that it is a chidvrutti. It is because of the psychological modality, a change in the psychology of the reader caused by the Vyanjana Shakti of the text. So Pollock is very angry with all this, that what has happened here, right? Because what Abhinav Gupta did was he took Bhattanayak's theory and kind of turned it against him. And the tradition in general does not recognize this fact at all. For the tradition, all that Abhinav Gupta did is just rephrase what Bhattanayak was saying. He just kind of corrected what Bhattanayak was saying. And Pollock is saying, no. Bhattanayak is saying something completely different. And the tradition has not recognized this. Okay, so this is how Pollock goes. That he's criticizing the Kavya Shastra tradition because it is neglecting. I mean, Bhattanayak's work, the Hruday Darpan, is in fact lost now, and so the tradition has simply not paid enough attention to that. Now, look, what is how do you resolve this particular dispute? Is Pollock really correct in what he's saying and all that? I mean, I think you would need a hardened rasa expert to answer all that. But what we do understand, what we can understand is that is look how Pollock is owning the tradition. He's sort of, he is as if it is his own tradition, and he's saying, "Oh, look at the problems in there. These people, there are all these good guys, who really were the ones who came up, who understood Kavya properly as a socio-political aesthetic, but the tradition has not paid sufficient attention to that." And his whole project then is of giving it a new direction. And what he has written is sort of to give justification to why this is required. So this is basically what I have explained in my paper, and I think I'll just conclude now with just sort of leave you with these couple of discomforting facts. Like, first of all, I mean, this is not, I mean, whatever Pollock is saying, it's not an India versus West thing. It's not like Western scholars in general say this. There are scholars like Daniel Ingalls and Mason and so on who have tried to understand Kavya as a religious aesthetic. And at the same time, you have scholars like Sam Trivedi and V.K. Chari who are not comfortable with this religious aesthetics and who want to remove the religious aspect of all of Indian aesthetic theory. And so while on the one hand we have these attempts being made to sort of understand Indian aesthetic theory in a purely secular perspective, you have on the other hand certain Christian groups who are appropriating the rasa of Abhinav Gupta or Rupa Goswami's works, like going through their theories of religious rasa, like rasa as a divine experience, and trying to sort of build a narrative on Christian bhakti rasa and expressing it through Bharatnatyam. I think Rajiv ji has, I think, mentioned that somewhere, and I kind of hinted at that in my paper as well. Okay, so that's basically what I wanted to share with you today. Thanks.
Ashay, this is Ravi Joshi. Just wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit on, this was a wonderful presentation, taught me a lot about the subtleties of what you're trying to analyze and discuss. One thing is that in the previous two presentations, we heard a lot about the connectivity of this with Bharatanatyam Shastra, and specifically with you're talking here about the text and the reader. There they were talking about the prekshaka and the patra, the viewer and the artist. So can you give us a connection between both of them, and where do you think it fits in with Pollock's thing? Does it undermine what he's trying to do, or does it, Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ravi. Yeah, so basically, as I said, for Pollock, he wants rasa to arise in the character or the text. That is important for him because see the text, because for him, and in fact not just him, but the whole Marxist literary theory is that text is something that the elite control, and it is through literature that they sort of normalize oppression of the proletariat or whatever. Okay, I mean, why does the proletariat not challenge their oppression? It is because they are brainwashed through literature and so on, so that they are so they don't even realize it as oppression, and that's what happens. And that is how. So Pollock basically wants to show that text or characters and so on are deliberately constructed in such a way by elites to sort of send a certain socio-political message. But the thing is, within the Indian tradition, this has never been recognized. I mean, as I said, this is a Marxist theory. This is not an Indian theory. The Indians have never understood things in this way. They don't see this function of literature at all. For them, literature and in general art in India has been seen as a metaphysical experience. And this is what the Atma of Kavya. I mean, initially they thought that that Kavya was basically about alankars and so on. But then that was seen as Kavya Sharira, that is the body, just the external part of it, whereas the essence of Kavya, the Atma of Kavya, is its dhwani, is the way in which it creates this aesthetic delight in the reader, and that is seen as connected with the divine experience. But that is something that arises in the reader. I mean, the reader has to be at a certain level. His vasanas, like what he has, his prarabdha and so on, has to be at a certain level that he is rasika enough to appreciate all this. So this is where the tradition is going. And Pollock has something else to say. He's of course based on Marxist literary theory. But as I said, there's a second problem here, which is of Orientalism. So traditional, I mean, a few decades ago, Pollock could have just said whatever he wanted, and they could have said, the Indians are irrational, they are unscientific, they don't understand things, and the Europeans are the only one who are rational and scientific and so on, and so they will tell us what is the right thing. But in postmodernity, you can't do that. You have to appreciate the tradition. You have to follow what the tradition has been doing. And in order to do that, which is why Pollock's works can be a bit too complex, because he can't just say what he wants. He also needs to further say that this is what the tradition is also saying. So that is where the complexity comes in. Okay? I don't know if I've answered your question, but...
So I think with this, I'd like to close this particular session. Thank you.
To help me, you can do two things. You can go to the subscribe button on my YouTube and subscribe. We need more subscribers there. Secondly, I get lots of emails on people saying, how do we donate? How can we help you? You go to rajivmalhotra.com or you go to infinityfoundation.com and you can hit the donate button. You can donate in dollars. There are different ways mentioned. If you want to donate in rupees, there is a column called Infinity Foundation India, and you click that and there are instructions on how you can donate in India.